Hello, we are in week 6, and we will actually be covering chapter 6, which is memory. Here is the to-do list for the week. As usual, we'll go over the objectives, we'll go over what's here on the agenda, and then I do have a couple of things I want to talk about in terms of discussion, so I want to save a little bit of time for that. But first off, let's talk about the objectives for chapter 6. This chapter follows the chapter in learning, and it's really done on purpose because memory is so interrelated to how we learn, right? Sometimes I wish they would have done the memory chapter first. I've considered doing that. But honestly, I think that understanding the learning principles that we just covered, like classical conditioning and operant conditioning, is really important to further understanding then, well, how do we remember material? Okay, so the beginning part of the chapter talks a little bit more about the theory behind memory processing. Okay, so how do we process memories in the brain? What does that look like? So when we take information from our perceptual world, how do we transfer that information into language our brain understands? So a lot of it deals also with taking what we're sensing and perceiving and then converting that to what our brain sees as information regarding meaningful experiences. Okay, so we'll get a little bit into encoding, which is putting information in, and how we process, and that can be everything from visual to acoustic to semantic, which is the meaning of things. You know, we see things, we hear things, and then we interpret the meaning. And so semantic encoding is, very individualistic. It is up to the interpretation of the person of what something means to them, and is a mixture of experiences, really. But we encode that into verbal information, and then we have to spit that back out later when we're recalling that information. So we'll get into different types of memory, kind of 3 main phases or compartments, if you will, of memory, which is sensory memory. That is, everything that we sense, and is very, very short term. And then we'll get into the capacity of working memory, otherwise known as short-term memory, where the processing is a little bit longer than encoding, but still very short. Okay, we don't hang on to that information for very long, and nor is it big enough to store for any indefinite part of time. So then we'll move into the more longer lasting stage of memory, which is long-term memory. Okay, how does something get into long-term memory? And when we form those kinds of memories, what's happening in our brain, structurally speaking? And does it matter what the types of memories are? So we'll distinguish between what's called implicit and explicit memories. These are just memories for doing various things, okay? Whether it be memorizing a poem or tying your shoes, riding a bike, or remembering the names of all the presidents, okay? These are all very different types of memory, and we store them differently in our brain. So that'll be the beginning, and then we'll get into now the retrieval process. So what happens when you want to get that information back out? So first and foremost, before we can retrieve, we'll take a look at the difference in types of memory, recall, recognition. Depending upon how you store information is going to affect then how you're going to go back and get it out later. The environment can definitely play a role, as well as your internal emotional state. So our mood affects our memory. Our environment, where we're at, what we're doing, who's around us, affects our memory. And so that all affects retrieval. Okay. I think the most important thing, or the most interesting thing that people are curious about when it comes to memory, is why do we forget? and how do we forget things? Why do I forget some things more than others? And why can't I forget certain things that I want to forget? So we'll get into the latter part of the book, which is forgetting, and sort of the different pieces that are involved when we forget something. Is it an encoding failure? Did we fail to get the information in correctly in the first place? Or is it a matter of storage decay? Like, it's in there, it's just I can't access it. Or the material that got in has over time decayed due to various reasons. Okay, so that all is the area of retrieval failure, and that things can get in the way. So the effects of interference, and sometimes we want to forget. So sometimes we're motivated to forget certain details or incidences and things like that. We'll talk a little bit about misinformation, imagination, and source amnesia, which is interesting. This will also tie into our discussion board post, as well as eyewitness testimony will tie into our discussion board posts. Some different controversial topics in there, but memory is one of those things that is very individual. It is not consistently reliable across peoples. It depends on the person, depends on the setting, it depends on what the person is doing and where they're at when they're spitting information back out. Like, I saw such and such event take place. Well, where are you when you're explaining that? Are you under stress? Are you in a position where you feel threatened? Are you sure of all the details of the event? Or is someone giving you that information? All of these things can affect or contribute to how we remember something. Okay, so that kind of sums up the chapter pretty good. The lecture slides here, and then really some great videos in episode 8 of my psych lab on memory. I would say, this is one of those areas that just watching some of the material here is really going to help solidify some of the concepts. There's discussion about the episodic memories, implicit and explicit memories, a little bit about amnesia and Alzheimer's disease and the role that memory plays there. So some neuropsych stuff. So definitely watch the videos for this week. I think it will help a lot. And you want to do that really before you're diving into this discussion. So here's where I want to spend the rest of our podcast here, just talking about the discussions. I'm noticing that not a lot, but a handful of people are posting their original post, the first day that the material's available. So like Monday. And I'm not saying that you don't haven't read the material yet, but if you're diving into the discussion boards on Monday, it kind of makes me think that maybe you haven't done the reading, or you haven't read the videos, or both. I don't know. But I want you to have enough time digesting the material before you go ahead and try to answer these questions. I want you working with it. I want you having, at the very least, read the Hawk reading and the chapter reading, and hopefully have watched the videos, because again, you need time to digest this material before you're able to adequately answer these questions. You don't want to be sparse on your answers to these questions. These shouldn't be bullet pointed answers. These should be well constructed, well thought out answers that integrate everything that you've read in the chapter, because here the chapter's talking all about memory and what affects it, and the different processes we go through when we're trying to remember something or retrieve something. That's great stuff that can get put into your answers for these questions. So these answers shouldn't just be based on the Hawk reading, right? So for this week, the Hawk reading has to do with eyewitness testimony and the research of Elizabeth Loftus in particular. And so definitely you're going to want to integrate in the Hawk, what Hawk had to say, about Loftus's research, but you also want to integrate in the main chapter. And now that you have an idea of, okay, there's sensory memory, there's short-term memory, there's long-term memory, and when we want to retrieve something, here's some things that can happen in that process. When we forget something, here's why. All of that stuff you want to kind of show off to me that you know. This is your chance to show off, because the only ways that you're assessed in this class are via multiple choice questions and then these discussion posts. So this really is, again, just your chance to show me what you know, show me how you're doing that. And not just in your original post here where you're answering these questions, but also when you're replying to other students. So when you see someone's answer to these 3 questions, you have an opportunity to go, oh, well, really good. Did you also think about this? Or I'd like to add this, or what about this example? That's your chance to really extend the dialogue. I've been writing that in a lot of people's posts because I feel that people have been very brief and just, oh, great post. I thought that was really interesting how you said, you know, X, Y, and Z. That's not enough. Okay, that's not a dialogue. That's a one comment. So if you're looking for 10-point posts, right, really try to integrate your materials into your answers here, and as well do it on your feedback that you're giving to your peers about their posts. Okay, so that's kind of my main thing for the discussion. I know I wrote that in an announcement this past week. Just saying like, hey, here's what I'm noticing in the discussions. Here's how we can improve those. You know, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't give out 10-point discussion posts to everyone, but you have to earn them. And you shouldn't be being super brief. You know, I'm noticing some people are posting all of their posts within a span of 7 minutes. And if it's only taking you 7 minutes to write your answers to these questions and reply to 3 people, there's something going wrong there, okay? And so that is where I want, you know, really some of your bulk of your time to be spent is kind of beefing those up and making those look really fantastic, okay? So this week, there's no test, there's just the quiz on the memory chapter, and that wraps up the week. But again, if you have any questions pertaining to the discussion posts or anything like that, you can always feel free to email me. A couple people have, and I've given feedback, and hopefully that's been helpful. But I always encourage that, okay? So have a great week, everyone. Thank you.